Hey friends, tonight we're zooming out, way out. Before there were empires, or pyramids, or plumbing, there was just dust, chaos, and the worst group project ever, the universe. We're going to drift through time slowly, gently from the birth of stars to the rise and fall of civilizations, with plenty of war, weirdness, and questionable fashion along the way. So before you sink too deep into your pillow, make sure to like the video and subscribe. But only if you actually enjoy slow-burning, slightly sarcastic bedtime history. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time. It is always wild to see this sleepy little community stretch across the planet. Now dim the lights, let the hum of your fan settle into the background, and take a deep breath. Because tonight, we're falling asleep through all of human history. Ready? Let's begin at the beginning. When the universe exploded, and nobody had a name yet. The universe begins not with a whisper, but with a scream, a flash, a bang, a violent exhale from nothing into everything. No stars, no planets, no tick-tock. Just raw energy trying to figure itself out. Scientists call it the Big Bang, but really, it's more like the universe had a panic attack and accidentally created time. In a fraction of a second, it goes from zero to infinity, an endless void suddenly filled with particles, pressure, and the kind of heat that would melt your entire existence before you had time to ask why. There's no light yet, just chaos. Unimaginably dense, crushing chaos. Space doesn't exist. It's still trying to decide where up and down should be. Time isn't ticking. It's stumbling, like a newborn deer with quantum legs. The whole thing is expanding faster than your Wi-Fi gives up on you, and it's still expanding right now, by the way. You're inside it. You're made of it. But back then, you were just a twinkle in a hydrogen atom's eye, and that atom hadn't even formed yet. Seconds pass. That's a new thing, seconds. The universe cools just enough to let quarks settle down and start forming protons and neutrons, which is adorable. Like toddlers building blocks while the house is on fire. Eventually, those particles find each other and decide to form the first atoms, mostly hydrogen, a little helium, no carbon, no oxygen. Nothing that breathes, or writes poetry, or binge-watches history videos at 2:17 in the morning. Just boring, basic atoms floating around in a superheated soup with nowhere to be. For a long time, that's all there is. Darkness, an expanding cloud of hot, lonely atoms. The universe has no structure yet. No galaxies, no gravity, strong enough to really pull things into shape. It's the ultimate introvert phase. Lots of potential, no connections. Then, after about 400 years, yes, years, things finally chill out. Literally, the universe cools just enough to let light travel freely. Before that, photons were crashing into particles like toddlers at a birthday party. But now, the lights come on. It's still just hydrogen, helium, and a sprinkling of physics. But at least it's glowing. The first cosmic dawn. It looks beautiful from a distance. If you had eyes, which you don't. Because you're still atoms. Get in line. Millions of years pass, and gravity, bless its patient little heart, starts pulling things together. Hydrogen clouds clump up, swirl, collapse under their own weight, and boom, stars are born. Big, hot, unstable stars that live fast and die in dramatic explosions. They create new elements, seeding the universe with the building blocks of everything: iron, carbon, oxygen. One day, those atoms will form bones and hearts and bad decisions. But for now, they just float, cooling off in the aftermath of ancient violence. The stars gather into galaxies. The galaxies form clusters. And the universe, once a hot mess of panic and particles, starts to look organized. Not peaceful, exactly, but less like a nervous breakdown, and more like a very slow, very complicated painting coming into focus. And somewhere in all that silence, drifting through space and time, are the atoms that will eventually become you. But not yet. We still have about 13.7 billion years of chaos to get through. You can close your eyes. The stars are just getting started. Somewhere in the quiet chaos of space, a particularly dramatic cloud of stardust starts taking itself way too seriously. Leftovers from ancient star deaths, drifting through the dark, pulled together by gravity like a cosmic group hug that slowly gets out of hand. It spins, collapses, heats up, and then to date forms a brand new star, our sun, a hot, blinding ball of nuclear fusion that doesn't care what you think of it. And around this overachieving fireball, more clumps of matter start to form. One of them is Earth, tiny, angry, and still figuring out what kind of planet it wants to be. At first, Earth is molten, like full-blown rage lava, just spinning around, bubbling with magma, pummeled by meteorites, and boiling from the inside out. It doesn't have an atmosphere, or a crust, or any chill whatsoever. It's hot, toxic, and constantly on fire, a bit like puberty, but for a planet. For millions of years, Earth is basically a volcanic tantrum in space. You couldn't stand on it. You'd melt, scream, and evaporate, probably in that order. But give it time. Earth, like most dramatic teenagers, starts to cool off. A thin crust forms over the bubbling insides. The atmosphere begins to develop, not breathable, mind you, but at least it's trying. It's made of carbon dioxide, nitrogen, a bit of water vapor, and a whole lot of nope. Then, one day, something wild happens. It rains. For the first time, it rains. And not just a drizzle, this is a torrential, planet-sized downpour that lasts for centuries. The surface sizzles, steam hisses from the rocks. And finally, Earth invents oceans. Giant, restless bodies of water that will later become home to jellyfish, seaweed, and confused tourists. But for now, they're just endless blue puddles, sitting atop a planet that's still unsure if it wants to host life or just stay angry forever. With oceans come weather. Winds start to swirl. Storms rage. Lightning flashes over empty seas, as if the sky itself is warming up for the drama to come. Earth now has water, clouds, and a basic climate system that's mostly just chaos with temperature. The surface is still unstable there. Are volcanoes, earthquakes, and tectonic plates beginning to slide around like drunk puzzle pieces. Welcome to continental drift, Earth's slow-motion game of rearranging landmasses for the next several billion years. This is where things get extra moody. The crust breaks into chunks plates, and those plates start bumping into each other. They crash, slide, collide, and sometimes one sinks beneath the other in an awkward tectonic hug that melts everything in its path. Mountains rise, oceans deepen. Islands are born and immediately start drifting like they've got somewhere to be. None of this is fast. The continents move at the speed of your fingernail growing. But in geologic terms, that's practically a sprint. Still, it's progress. Earth, once a molten mess, is now a planet with weather, water, and a shifting personality. It doesn't have life yet. No trees, no bugs, no awkward mammals trying to invent taxes. Just land, sea, and the occasional volcanic scream from below. But the stage is set. The ingredients are in the pot. All Earth needs now is a spark. And somewhere in a shallow, stormy ocean, that spark is about to arrive. But for now, the planet sleeps beneath cloud and tide, dreaming of what it might become. For a long time, Earth is silent. Not peaceful, just silent. Oceans crash, winds howl, volcanoes erupt with righteous fury, but there's no one around to care. Just rock and water, taking turns being dramatic. But deep in the shallows, in a pocket of sunlit ooze, something stirs. Something microscopic, something ambitious. Life. It doesn't start with a roar, it starts with a bubble. A fragile membrane wrapped around a tangle of molecules that suddenly, somehow, figures out how to copy itself. It doesn't even know why, it just does. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, and before long, the ocean is swarming with single-celled organisms who refuse to leave. Life, it turns out, is contagious, like glitter or a bad idea. These early life forms are tiny, invisible. They float, drift, and split themselves over and over again without asking permission. No brains, no hearts, just sacks of goo doing their best to stay together in a world that really isn't rooting for them. The planet is still full of acid rain, UV radiation, and tectonic anxiety. But these little cells, they don't care. They endure. Some of them get creative. They start figuring out how to turn sunlight into energy. It's photosynthesis, but they don't know that. They're just freeloading off the sun, and in the process, they start releasing oxygen. At first, it's a waste product, something they burp out into the atmosphere. But over time, this accidental pollution starts to build up. The planet's air slowly fills with the stuff. And for a while, this is a problem. Oxygen is toxic to many early microbes. The Great Oxygenation Event, as it's later called, is basically a mass murder. Life invents a gas that kills most of the life that made it. Still, evolution marches on, utterly unbothered. The survivors adapt. Some get better at processing oxygen. Others burrow into muck and pretend nothing happened. But the real plot twist comes when two cells bump into each other, and instead of fighting, one moves in. Literally, a smaller cell takes up residence inside a larger one, like an organelle Airbnb. And suddenly, cells become more complicated. They develop nuclei, organelles, compartments. Eukaryotes are born, the VIPs of biology. These new cells are bigger, better, and far more dramatic. And soon, they do the unthinkable. They invent sex. Instead of just cloning themselves, they start swapping genetic material like awkward teenagers at a school dance. It's messy, inefficient, and occasionally fatal, but it creates variety. Evolution, which was once crawling along, now starts sprinting. Eventually, some cells decide that being alone is overrated. They join forces, stick together, and form colonies. Over time, these colonies become more specialized. One group digests, another moves, another signals. Multicellular life is born, not out of ambition, but out of exhaustion. Why do everything yourself when you can make someone else do it? Now, life can grow bigger, stranger. It can develop eyes, limbs, spines. But we're still far from that. Right now, Earth is still just a swirling ocean of slime, filled with microscopic soap bubbles that refuse to quit. And yet, it's working. Life is not just surviving, it's thriving. It's setting the stage for every dinosaur, every tree, every mistake with a credit score. But first, we need fish. And fish need backbones. And backbones need time. So for now, the ocean whispers with life quiet, invisible, relentless. For billions of years, life is basically slime. Soft-bodied, microscopic, and generally minding its own business. Cells float, divide, evolve slowly, and occasionally try new things like flagella or membranes with flair. The oceans are quiet, unless you count the relentless bubbling of photosynthesis and the occasional chemical squabble between bacteria. Then suddenly, and for reasons still debated, switch flips. It's the Cambrian period. Life goes from nap mode to overdrive. Evolution hits the gas, and the ocean explodes with weirdness. This isn't a gentle bloom, this is a biological rave. Creatures with armor, creatures with spikes, creatures with too many eyes, and questionable symmetry. The fossil record before this moment is like a sketchbook. After, it's a full-color nightmare. The Cambrian explosion isn't a literal explosion, but it might as well be. In a geologic blink roughly 20 million years, which is basically Tuesday in deep time-complex life, shows up and throws a tantrum. Trilobites appear first. Small, armored, bug-like things that crawl across the seafloor like sentient ravioli. They've got compound eyes, jointed legs, and the first real sense of style. They come in thousands of variations, from sleek and smooth to spiky and ridiculous. Some are the size of your thumbnail, others the size of a house cat. They scuttle, burrow, swim, and generally dominate. If the Cambrian had an Instagram account, trilobites would be the influencers. But they're not alone. Sponges, which once floated passively, now start growing skeletonstony glass-like spikes that say, "Please don't eat me." Worms, previously soft and pathetic, grow teeth. Real, pointy, flesh-shredding teeth. Some even develop bristles and armor plates, because apparently it's that kind of party. Creatures evolve fins, flaps, and proto-limbs. Some learn to swim. Others anchor to the seafloor and just vibe. Everyone's trying something new. It's a biological arms race, and there are no rules. This is the first time in Earth's history that ecosystems start looking like ecosystems. Predators, prey, scavengers, filters, a full food web spinning itself into existence with no guidance whatsoever. Nature is experimenting wildly. Some designs are clever, like early arthropods with legs and exoskeletons. Others are less so, like hallucigenia, a creature so confusing scientists once reconstructed it upside down and backward. It had legs like spikes and spikes like legs, and honestly, no one's convinced it wasn't a prank. Oceans fill with movement. Anomalocaris, the first apex predator, swims through the water with sideways eyes and terrifying jaws like a pineapple slicer. It eats trilobites for breakfast. Brachiopods settle into hard shells and try to mind their business. Mollusks begin testing out coiled designs, which will eventually lead to things like snails and squids. Everything is armored, toothed, or twitching. Even algae starts growing with a bit more ambition. The Cambrian doesn't care if you're ready. It's happening. And beneath the waves, Earth becomes a gallery of alien prototypes, some elegant, some hideous, most doomed to extinction. But that's how evolution works. It throws things at the wall to see what crawls, swims, or eats the wall. Eventually, some of these creatures will walk on land. Others will become your ancestors. But for now, they're just trying not to get eaten. And for the first time in history, the oceans aren't just alive, they're full of drama. The world keeps spinning, and life keeps evolving like it has something to prove. The oceans are packed with creatures that now have jaws, spines, and way too many appendages, but evolution, never content, decides it's time to go vertical. Life crawls out of the sea and onto land, dragging its slimy body across the mud like it owns the place. It's not a graceful entrance. Early land dwellers flop around with stubby limbs and gills that work about as well as a wet match. But they're trying. And eventually, they figure it out. Legs get stronger. Lungs stop being confused. And vertebrates start breathing real air. Amphibians come first. They're moist, awkward, and need to lay eggs in water, which means they're basically still in a long-distance relationship with the ocean. But then reptiles show up, and they change the game. Reptiles don't need water to breed. They invent the amniotic egg, which is basically a life support system for baby lizards. Now creatures can lay eggs on dry land and not immediately regret it. Reptiles spread fast, slithering and crawling and sunbathing like they own the planet. Eventually, a group of reptiles evolves into Archosaur's ruling lizard's ant. From that messy family reunion come the dinosaurs. And once they arrive, everything else gets shoved to the background. Dinosaurs don't just live, they take over, loudly. For over 165 million years, they stomp, roar, graze, hunt, squawk, and generally treat Earth like their personal Jurassic theme park. They come in every shape imaginable: towering meat, eaters with foot, long teeth, spike, covered herbivores the size of buses, duck-billed weirdos with crests that probably doubled as party horns. Some grow feathers, some grow armor, some grow brains, but only just enough to figure out how to chase something smaller and not trip. The planet rearranges itself around them. Continents drift, oceans rise and fall, volcanoes scream from the inside of the Earth. But through it all, the dinosaurs persist. They survive heat waves, ice ages, and bad evolutionary decisions. Some of them even try flying. Birds begin as small raptor-like dinosaurs who jump from trees and learn how to glide, mostly because falling hurts and evolution rewards anything that doesn't immediately die. Meanwhile, mammals are here too. Technically, They're small, warm-blooded, and mostly living in fear. Think mouse-sized creatures hiding in the bushes and hoping not to become someone's midnight snack. They eat insects, scurry around at night, and invent being anxious long before humans ever show up. For millions of years, mammals are the underdogs in a world designed for titans. And then, one day, without warning, the sky falls. Literally, a giant asteroid, roughly the size of a city, slams into the planet near what's now the Yucatan Peninsula. The explosion is catastrophic. Firestorms rage. The sky darkens. Global temperatures plummet. It's not just an extinction, it's a reset button. In a matter of weeks, food chains collapse. Most dinosaurs die. The party's over. Except for the birds. They hang on, flapping through the apocalypse like scrappy survivors in a bad disaster movie. And the mammals? They crawl out of the shadows, blinking in the ashy sunlight, and realize their terrifying roommates are finally gone. Now it's their turn, but that's another nightmare entirely. The dust hasn't even settled. The sky is still choked with soot. Trees are charred, oceans acidified, the air sharp with extinction. Dinosaurs' former landlords of Earth are gone. Not just gone, obliterated. Their bones litter the landscape like a cautionary tale. In their place, the silence is deafening. And out of that silence, something stirs. Not boldly. Not with fanfare, but with nervous, rodent-sized steps. Mammals. They've been here the whole time, skittering in the shadows, hiding beneath ferns and under rocks, living mostly at night and constantly on edge. During the age of dinosaurs, mammals were glorified snacks. They couldn't afford to be loud, or big, or brave. So instead, they were clever, small, warm-blooded, fast when it counted. They chewed insects, stole eggs, raised litters quietly, and avoided eye contact with anything that roared. But now, the world is empty. The thunderous footsteps of tyrannosaurs are gone. The skies are no longer ruled by leathery winged terrors. It's quiet, and for the first time in 160 million years, mammals aren't running, they're walking forward, hesitantly, like interns on their first day at a job where the last employee was eaten by management. They don't take over all at once. At first, it's just more of the same. Small, twitchy creatures with sharp teeth and good noses. But slowly, incrementally, evolution starts testing the waters. Some mammals get bigger, others try new diets. Herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, anything that works. They explore the trees, the rivers, the open plains. There's room now. Space to grow. Mistakes to make. The age that follows is the Paleocene, and it's basically a blank slate with fur. Mammals diversify like mad. Some get weird. Some get woolly. Some get horrifyingly large. The biggest land mammals ever to live show up, just to prove a point. Others shrink down, burrow, climb, glide. Whales, believe it or not, start as tiny deer-like animals who decide walking is overrated and go back to the sea. Bats develop sonar. Primates grow opposable thumbs and suspiciously large brains. One lineage in particular begins climbing trees and staying there. These early primates have grasping hands, forward-facing eyes, and the audacity to look curious. Over millions of years, they branch out, some stay in the trees, some come down. One group learns to walk upright. Their spines complain, their feet rebel, but they do it anyway. Walking frees up their hands, and with hands, they begin to change everything. They learn to make tools, fire, stories. They hunt in groups. They paint caves. They cry, laugh, bury their dead, and complain about the weather. They're not quite human, not yet, but they're close. And among them, somewhere in a tangled genetic family tree that involves a lot of shouting and migration, is the creature who will eventually become your grandmother. Not metaphorically, literally. She may not look like much, small, hairy, slightly annoyed, but she carries the blueprint, the instincts, the nervous energy. She has the beginnings of language, of empathy, of gossip, and most importantly, She survives. Through ice ages and predators, through childbirth without anesthesia, through starvation and storms. She endures, so you can someday scroll through history videos while eating cereal in bed. So yes, the mammals rose nervously, cautiously, unsure of what came next. But one thing was certain: the age of hiding was over, and the age of overthinking had just begun. The planet keeps spinning. The continents keep drifting like forgetful party guests, colliding, pulling apart, rearranging themselves with no regard for whoever might be living on them. Meanwhile, in some leafy corner of Africa, a group of primates is doing something peculiar. They're thinking, not survival-level thinking, not where's my next meal thinking. This is deeper, messier, more dangerous. It's self-awareness. It's staring at the moon and wondering what it wants. It's realizing you exist, and then immediately wishing you didn't. These primates walk on two legs now, mostly out of habit. Standing upright lets them see over the grass, carry things in their hands, and dramatically point at stuff. Their hands are nimble. Their brains are growing, and with those brains come problems. They start chipping stones into tools. At first, it's practical cutting meat, scraping hides, opening things that don't want to be opened. But it doesn't stop there. Once they figure out that rocks can become knives, the possibilities unravel fast. They tame fire. They don't invent it lightning, and volcanoes have been doing that since forever. But they learn to steal it, feed it, and keep it alive like some cranky, glowing pet. Fire gives them warmth, protection, the ability to cook food, and a dramatic way to stare into the abyss at night. Around the flames, they begin to talk. Gossip is born. Who's mating with who? Who stole whose berries? Who saw the big cat first but didn't say anything? Language begins not with poetry, but with complaints. Time passes. Evolution gets bold. These upright apes become something else, something recognizably human. Homo sapiens, that's you. Or at least the rough draft. They spread out across the globe, chasing game, fleeing weather, and generally making a mess of every environment they enter. Wherever they go, animals go extinct. Ecosystems change. Fire follows them. So do footprints. So does art. They start painting on cave walls. Not for survival, not for food, but for something stranger meaning. They draw bison, handprints, stars. They carve little figurines and bury their dead with flowers. These are not practical decisions. These are emotional ones. Somewhere in their fast-burning brains, stories begin to take root. Beliefs, gods, regrets. They invent clothes, and shame shortly after. They build shelters, make spears, form tribes. They begin organizing themselves into groups that hunt together, laugh together, sometimes fight to the death over whose rock pile is bigger. Territory becomes a thing. So does status. One day, someone draws a line in the dirt and calls it mine. And just like that, property is born. So is conflict. Agriculture is still a ways off, but the anxiety has already arrived. These early humans have started thinking not just about now, but about later. What if the food runs out? What if the sky gods are angry? What if the fire goes out? What if she doesn't like me? Congratulations, sexistential dread has entered the chat. For better or worse, Homo sapiens are here to stay. Curious, emotional, easily startled, and deeply obsessed with everything from mating rituals to the shape of the moon. They are clever, messy, and completely convinced that they are the main characters in a universe that has not once acknowledged their existence. And yet they endure, they wander, they dream, they worry, they build, and in doing so, they set the world on a path it will never walk back from. Humanity has begun, and nothing will ever be simple again. For the vast majority of human history, roughly 95% civilization doesn't exist. No cities, no taxes, no written language, no plumbing, just people, walking, always walking. Across savannas, deserts, mountains, forests, tundra, they move not for fun, but because staying in one place means starvation. Food is wild, unpredictable, and never where you left it. So you follow it, Herds of animals, seasonal berries, migrating fish, whatever, has calories and doesn't run too fast. This is the era of hunter-gatherers. It's not glamorous. Life is short, sharp, and surprisingly rhythmic. You wake up at dawn, scratch at bug bites, stretch your sore legs, and then spend the entire day looking for anything to eat. If you're lucky, your group stumbles upon a cluster of ripe fruit or brings down a deer with a sharpened stick and a prayer. If not, you chew on roots, stare at the sky, and hope tomorrow sucks less. There's no TikTok, but there are stories. At night, when the fire burns low and your feet are blistered, someone starts talking. A tale about the giant elk that got away. About the stars and what they mean. About the spirit of the wind, or how the first humans were born from the bark of a sacred tree. The stories change with each retelling, but the need for them doesn't. They're not just entertainment. They're maps, warnings, blueprints for surviving a world that doesn't care if you make it to next week. Your home is the world itself. Sometimes a cave. Sometimes a lean-to made of branches and animal hide. Sometimes just the dirt under your back and the sky above your face. You have no address, no fixed walls, and no closet full of regrets. Everything you own can be carried on your body. A tool, a pouch, a bone pendant, maybe a sharp rock you refuse to give up because it fits just right in your hand. That's your inheritance. Despite the hard conditions, there's a strange kind of balance. You eat what you find, you kill what you need. You waste nothing because wasting gets you dead. Your muscles ache, but you're strong. You're not alone. You live in a tight-knit group of maybe 20, maybe 100. Everyone knows each other's scent, laugh, and sneeze. You share food. You raise children communally. You fight sometimes, but there are no empires, no kings, just people trying not to freeze to death in the wrong valley. Illness exists, but it's simple. Infection, injury, hunger. No pandemics caused by commuting or high fructose corn syrup. You die young, most don't make it past 30, but you die knowing the land, the stars, and the faces around your fire. You won't get a pension, but you might get a story passed down about how you outran a lion once, or how you climbed that cliff just to steal a honeycomb and somehow lived to tell about it. Occasionally, you stumble upon something weird. A strange patch of land where food is plentiful, where water flows predictably, where you don't have to move so much. You linger a little longer. You plant a seed, not knowing you've just committed history's first irreversible mistake. But that's still coming. For now, you're a hunter-gatherer. You're dirty, barefoot, bruised, and strangely alive. The world hasn't been carved up yet. You don't own land. You live on it. You don't conquer nature. You answer to it. And at night, you stare up at the stars, wondering what they're thinking. It starts with a seed, not metaphorically, literally. Somewhere in the Fertile Crescent, or maybe China, or maybe a few other places all at once, someone bends down and sticks a grain of wild wheat into the dirt. Maybe they're tired of chasing animals. Maybe they're just experimenting. Maybe it was an accident. Doesn't matter. The wheat grows, they harvest it, and suddenly there's a new idea in the air. Maybe we don't have to move anymore. It's subtle at first. A few patches of grain here and there. A few people staying longer in one spot to tend to it. But once you start planting, you have to stick around. Someone needs to keep an eye on the sprouts. Then the sprouts become food. Then that food becomes winter storage. And just like that, humans go from nomadic foragers to sedentary farmers. Without realizing, they've walked into history's first cubicle. It seems like a good deal, food on demand. No more chasing deer through the mud butt. The fine print is brutal. Farming isn't just hard, it's relentless. You wake with the sun, dig, plant, water, weed, repeat. Rain is unpredictable. So are pests. Crops fail. Blight spreads. And unlike a wild berry bush, a wheat field doesn't just grow itself. You put in work daily, bone-aching, back-breaking work, and in return, you get porridge. Forever. And here's the kicker. Your diet gets worse. As a hunter-gatherer, you ate a variety of plants, nuts, fruits, and meat. Now it's grain, mostly grain. Your body, designed for diversity, rebels. You get weaker. Your bones shrink. Your teeth rot. Archaeologists can tell when a society switched to agriculture by the sudden appearance of cavities, arthritis, and shorter lifespans. Progress, it turns out, is hard on the spine. But farming does something else, something irreversible. It produces surplus, more food than one person can eat. And with surplus comes storage. With storage comes theft. And with theft comes guards, rules, property lines. And that one guy who insists he's in charge now because he has the biggest granary. Hierarchy is born. So is power. So are taxes. People begin clustering around the food. Villages form, then towns, then cities. Populations explode because more food means more babies. More babies means more workers. More workers means more food. It spirals. The rhythm of life changes. Seasons become deadlines. Rain becomes stress. Land becomes everything. And along the way, we invent things to manage the madness. Writing, to keep track of grain. Math, to count goats. Government, to keep people from stabbing each other over fences. Religion, to explain why the crops failed and whose fault it was. Farming doesn't just change how we eat it, changes how we think, how we organize, how we exist. And yet, we don't question it. Not really. Because by the time we realize we've traded freedom for routine, the fields are already planted, the kids are already born, the food is already growing. There's no going back. So we settle in. We build homes. We store grain. We chase harvests instead of herds. And somewhere deep in our collective nervous system, the ancient itch to move still lingers. But now, we stay. Because wheat, of all things, has made us its servants. Welcome to agriculture. Hope you like early mornings. Once farming becomes a way of life, people stop wandering and start gathering. At first, it's just a few huts around a water source, a communal fire pit, some tools left in the same place for once. But soon, those little villages grow. People stack mud bricks, dig irrigation ditches, and start arguing over property lines. Someone puts up a fence. Someone else builds a temple. And before long, the world has its first cities. It happens in more than one place. Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates, Egypt along the Nile, the Indus Valley beside a river system whose name time has mostly swallowed. Different languages, different gods, but the same basic idea. Humans building large, organized piles of themselves and their stuff. With cities come walls, not just metaphorical ones, though those show up too. Real walls, big ones, made of stone or mud brick. Built to keep out raiders, wild animals, and the terrifying thought that maybe no one outside actually wants to get in. Inside the walls, life gets complicated. You're no longer living in a band of 20 familiar faces. Now it's hundreds, thousands. People you've never met are now in charge of your food supply, your water, your taxes, your gods. And here's something no one planned for: trash. Before cities, waste was biodegradable. You dropped something, it rotted. Now, with so many people in one place, trash piles up. Pottery shards, broken tools, animal bones, and worse. The streets fill with refuse. Some ancient cities had sanitation systems, drains, sewers, even toilets, but most did not. Human waste becomes a feature of the urban landscape. You can now trace early civilization by the thickness of its garbage layer. But humans don't just pile up trash. They pile up systems. Bureaucracy is born. Someone has to track the grain, measure the land, decide whose goat wandered into whose barley. Writing emerges, not to compose poetry, but to keep records. Clay tablets filled with numbers and complaints, receipts, inventories, tax demands. Someone is always in charge of the counting, and that person always seems to have the nicest house. Laws follow soon after. Hammurabi's Code. If a man puts out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out. Equal parts justice and overcorrection. Written laws make rules feel permanent, even when they're unfair. They're carved into stone, literally. And with laws come punishments, prisons, hierarchies. Classism goes from an unspoken reality to a civic blueprint. You get elites who don't farm, priests who don't bleed, scribes who never touch dirt. And then you get everyone else, the laborers, the soldiers, the servants, the people who actually make the city function. Civilization, it turns out, is not an even deal. It gives structure, stability, and shared identity, but it also builds ladders, and not everyone gets to climb them. Still, cities thrive. People gather in markets, trade goods, share stories, worship gods with animal heads and solar crowns. They build ziggurats, temples, palaces. They paint the walls. They bury their dead with ceremony. They invent civilization, one crowded, smelly, noisy step at a time. And beneath it all, the garbage grows. History's quiet record keeper, a layer of broken things that will one day tell archaeologists exactly how advanced we thought we were. In the northeast corner of Africa, right where the Nile decides to stop meandering and dump itself into the Mediterranean, something extraordinary starts to take shape. It begins, as most things do, with a river. The Nile floods predictably, blesses the soil with silt, and makes farming unusually reliable. And wherever food is reliable, people settle down, multiply, and eventually start building things they probably shouldn't. Out of this fertile strip of green amid endless desert rises, Egypt, a civilization obsessed with permanence, sunlight, and the idea that death isn't the end, it's just a really complicated tax return. They build temples that stare down the sun, and palaces that smell faintly of incense and bureaucracy. But nothing captures the Egyptian spirit quite like the pyramid's massive stone triangles in the sand, designed to remind everyone that one guy was very important and very dead. The first pyramid isn't even a real pyramid. It's a step pyramid, built by stacking stone rectangles on top of each other, like an ambitious child playing with blocks. But it sets a precedent. Soon, the Egyptians are hauling multi-ton limestone blocks across the desert to build tombs taller than most modern buildings, all for pharaohs who truly believed they'd need golden chairs in the afterlife. These are not casual graves. These are spiritual launch pads. You die, you get embalmed, and your soul rides a cosmic barge into the heaven sidely, with a few servants, some jewelry, and a cat or two for company. Speaking of cats, Egypt worships them, literally. To kill a cat is to offend the gods. They're protectors, companions, and sacred murderers of snakes. They slink through homes and temples, demanding reverence and occasionally knocking over expensive things, as cats still do. If the gods had a favorite animal, it wasn't the lion, it was the smug little tabby by the hearth. Pharaohs rule as god-kings, not just rulers by blood, but incarnations of divine power. Their word is law, their face is carved into every wall, and their legacy is measured in stone. They are political figures, military commanders, religious icons, and, more often than not, highly paranoid. Power is heavy, especially when your advisors are constantly plotting, and your sons are just old enough to look ambitious. To run this sand-covered empire, the Egyptians invent writing. Not for poetry, though, they get to that eventually, but for admin. Hieroglyphs become the script of the state, tracking everything from grain to grave goods. Scribes rise as a respected class, wielding reed pens and memorizing dozens of symbols just to record how many ducks were delivered to which temple on what moon cycle. Medicine thrives. Astronomy is born. Mathematics becomes sacred. They chart the stars, track the flooding of the Nile, and build calendars more accurate than most people's horoscopes. They understand the body well enough to remove a liver, wrap it in linen, and store it in a jar shaped like a falcon. But it's not all mysticism and mummy wrapping. There's backbreaking labor, droughts, famines, and wars. Egypt isn't timeless, it's constantly rebuilding itself, dynasty after dynasty, always reaching backward for some imagined golden age. And through it all, the sun beats down mercilessly. Skin darkens, crops wither, and people pray for shade, water, and maybe a lighter linen tunic. Still, for all its heat, sand, and ceremonial rigidity. Ancient Egypt stands tall, its monuments carved into the bones of the earth, its stories inked onto papyrus and stone. A civilization obsessed with eternity, doing its best to leave behind a version of forever. In the land between the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, civilization rises like a headache that won't go away. It's hot, flat, and the rivers flood unpredictably, turning fields into mud and tempers into legends. But the soil is fertile, and the people persistent. Here, in Mesopotamia, humans decide that chaos is no excuse not to organize themselves. So they start building cities, carving laws, and writing things down, not because they're inspired, but because they're tired of forgetting how many goats they owe the temple. The Sumerians come first. Short, practical, and deeply overwhelmed by their gods, they carve the first known writing into wet clay using a stylus made from reeds. It's not poetic, it's not romantic. It's accounting, cuneiform they call it, and it's used for recording grain, livestock, and lists of things no one wants to be responsible for. But from that humble beginning, the idea of written language spreads like bureaucratic wildfire. Soon, entire libraries are dedicated to the things people hoped never to forget: laws, debts, omens, recipes for beer, and the occasional existential poem about why the gods keep ruining everything. The Sumerians also invent the city-state, little walled communities with big egos. Each has its own god, its own king, and its own reasons for not liking the neighbors. Doesn't get along with Lagash. Lagash resents Everyone argues over irrigation canals, water rights, and who stole whose ox last harvest. War becomes a normal part of spring, like pollen and disappointment. Soldiers march out, scribes write about it, statues are built, and then someone knocks them over 50 years later out of spite. Enter the Akkadians, who look at all these feuding cities and think, what if one ruler just took all of it? Sargon of Akkad builds the first empire anyone bothers to name. He conquers, unifies, and sets a trend that will define history when in doubt. Declare yourself king of everything and hope no one notices the logistics. The empire rises, it flourishes. Then it falls apart because of rebellion, drought, and the eternal truth that running an empire is mostly paperwork and crying. The Babylonians take over next. They love order. Hammurabi, their most famous king, writes down a massive code of laws and posts them in public. Justice, he decides, should be clear, severe, and ideally written in stone. Eye for an eye becomes a slogan, though it's applied more to the poor than the powerful. The Babylonians also love math. They invent place value, timekeeping, and the concept of zero, which is a great way to describe how much the peasants enjoy being taxed. Then come the Assyrians, who decide that the best way to rule is through sheer terror. Their armies are brutal, their kings insufferably proud, and their capital cities filled with lion-shrill lions, which they hunt for sport, because nothing says stability like domesticating fear. They carve reliefs of massacres into palace walls and write inscriptions bragging about how many cities they flattened. It's a PR strategy, soaked in blood and oddly effective for a while. Through it all, the land remains fertile, the rivers rise and fall, and people keep complaining about taxes, about neighbors, about kings who demand grain, and gods who demand sacrifice. Mesopotamia is not peaceful. It's relentless, but it's also where humans learn to manage complexity, to build and break institutions, to write down their grievances and call it history. The cradle of civilization, yes, but also a place where everyone, at all times, just wanted a nap. In the northwestern corner of the Indian subcontinent, long before anyone draws borders or carves out kingdoms, the Indus Valley civilization quietly thrives. It doesn't scream for attention like Egypt, or build giant death triangles in the desert. It simply exists with stunning efficiency. Cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa are laid out in neat grids, with sewage systems, public baths, and multi-story homes. It's a society that seems to value order, hygiene, and the radical idea of minding its own business. They don't leave behind self-aggrandizing statues or boastful monuments. Just bricks, beads, and an undeciphered script that still refuses to give up its secrets. And then, just as quietly as it appeared, it vanishes. There's no dramatic collapse, no fiery ending, just a slow fading. Climate shifts, rivers dry, trade routes crumble, people move on. The Indus civilization disappears like a polite ghost, leaving the room without interrupting the conversation. Into the vacuum comes the Vedic culture. Nomadic Indo-Aryan tribes sweep in from the northwest, bringing with them oral hymns, ritual fire, and a deep fondness for metaphysical questions no one asked. They don't build cities right away. They build verses massive, poetic texts called the Vedas, passed down by memory and song for centuries before anyone bothers to write them down. From these hymns grows a civilization steeped in rhythm, repetition, and the sneaking suspicion that reality might be more complicated than it looks. Language becomes sacred. Sanskrit emerges not just a tool for communication, but a cosmic vibration, a divine sound system fine-tuned to the universe. It's beautiful, complex, and irritatingly precise. It births philosophies, mantras, legal codes, and theological debates that will outlive empires. Around this time, a strange and sticky concept enters the cultural bloodstream: karma, the idea that your actions have consequences not just now, but across lifetimes. Do good, and you might come back as something better. Do bad, and you return as a cockroach with allergies. Reincarnation turns life into a kind of moral recycling program, and with it comes the idea that time isn't a line, but a wheel. It turns endlessly, chewing up souls and spitting them out again and again until they figure out how to step off the ride. This changes everything. The past is not behind you. It might be in front of you. Cause and effect blur. Time loops. Histories overlap. People begin arguing about how the cycle works, who gets to escape it, and what happens if you don't. Out of these debates emerge entire schools of thought. Some say the self is real. Others say it's an illusion. Some say reality is Brahmanoni, eternal, indivisible thing. Others ask if maybe we're just all very confused monkeys trying to meditate our way out of a meat suit. Through it all, life goes on. Villages grow. Kingdoms rise. Rituals become more elaborate. Social order crystallizes into caste, a system so deeply embedded it will shape lives for thousands of years. Gods multiply, stories twist into epics, and everyone has an opinion on everything, from the proper way to chant a verse to the best posture for transcending physical reality. India doesn't move in straight lines. It spirals. Ideas here don't end, they echo. Time folds back on itself. The same questions get asked again, dressed in new words, tied to new gods, sung in new meters. Nothing is ever settled, but everything is remembered. This is not a civilization obsessed with monuments. It's a civilization obsessed with meaning. And once it starts asking the big questions, it never stops. In the vast, rumbling belly of East Asia, two rivers shape the beginning of something enormous. The Yangtze flows wide and steady. The Yellow River, less polite, floods often and unpredictably, coating the land with rich silt and sudden devastation. It's beautiful and terrifying, a muddy lifeline with a temper. And on its banks, early Chinese civilization emerges, learning quickly that surviving nature means understanding it, documenting it, and occasionally building enormous walls to tell it no. By 2000 BCE, people are farming millet and rice, raising pigs, and constructing villages out of packed earth. Then come cities, bronze tools, elaborate tombs, and the first hints of a very long story. The Shang dynasty appears, carving oracle bone inscriptions into turtle shells and ox scapulae. These aren't just doodles, they're records, questions, prayers, requests to ancestors asking if it's a good time to plant crops or invade a neighbor. And this, perhaps more than anything, defines early China, writing things down obsessively. The Shang give way to the Zhou, who bring a new and incredibly useful concept to the table: the mandate of heaven. Basically, if a ruler is just, moral, and keeps the rivers in their banks, the gods smile upon him. If he's corrupt, cruel, or just kind of annoying, natural disasters will begin to happen. Peasants will get ideas, and eventually someone else will claim the mandate and take the throne. It's divine right with a performance review. Every rebellion from this point forward will justify itself by saying, "Don't look at me, the heavens told me to." With this celestial HR policy in place, dynasties rise and fall like clockwork. New rulers promise peace, prosperity, and lower grain taxes. Then the bureaucracy swells, the taxes rise anyway, and everyone wonders why nothing ever really changes. But bureaucracy is where China shines. Civil servants are tested on their knowledge of Confucian classics, poetry, and sometimes even proper brushstrokes. These exams are brutal, competitive, and often the only way a poor village boy can climb the social ladder. If you pass, you might govern a province. If you fail, you go home with a headache and a deep existential crisis. Meanwhile, paper is invented. Not papyrus, not parchment. Real, honest-to-goodness paper thin, flexible, and perfect for recording everything from tax rolls to poetry. This changes the game. Bureaucrats rejoice. Scholars weep gently. Artists and poets fill scrolls with ideas that will echo for centuries. The written word becomes the spine of society. History, philosophy, family records, nothing is too small to be documented, cataloged, and filed away with care. Chinese culture becomes obsessed with order, tradition, and the approval of the dead. Ancestors aren't just remembered, they're actively involved. Burn paper offerings, bow 3 times. Don't embarrass them, or they might haunt your dreams or curse your rice harvest. Families keep genealogies stretching back generations. A well-behaved son is worth more than gold. And if your great-grandfather's spirit disapproves of your career choices, that's between you and the afterlife. Rice agriculture takes root in the South. Cities grow. Philosophies bloom. Confucianism, Taoism, legalism, each with its own opinion on how to survive the world and your relatives. Society becomes a delicate dance of obedience, ambition, and ancestral reverence. The emperor is called the Son of Heaven, but his job security is still one earthquake away from total collapse. And through it all, China writes, everything, down. In the rocky, sunburned corners of the Mediterranean, civilization gets loud. The mountains are steep, the soil is stubborn, and the people, well, they don't agree on much. But somehow, out of scattered coastal villages and squabbling hilltop towns, a storm of ideas is about to explode. This is ancient Greece, and it doesn't arrive quietly. Instead of one big empire, Greece begins as a patchwork of city-states' independent little experiments in governance, ambition, and drama. Athens thinks it's smart. Sparta thinks it's tough. Corinth thinks it's rich. Each city-state has its own army, its own laws, and its own deeply inflated opinion of itself. They trade, they argue, they form alliances, and immediately betray them. War isn't an occasional thing, it's the weekend plan. And amid all this chaos, people start asking dangerous questions. Why are we here? What is truth? What makes a good life? What if the gods don't actually care? Enter the philosophers, bearded men in sandals who spend their days wandering around town squares, annoying everyone with metaphysical riddles. Socrates walks up to strangers and demands they define justice. Plato writes dialogues like philosophical fan fiction. Aristotle decides he's going to categorize the entire universe using logic, observation, and zero patience. Athens, for all its flaws, becomes the laboratory for democracy, not the modern kind. Their democracy is noisy, exclusionary, and deeply flawed, but revolutionary nonetheless. Citizens gather in assemblies, vote by raising hands or dropping stones, and occasionally exile people just for being too popular. It's politics as theater, and everyone's a critic. Meanwhile, Sparta is doing something completely different. No philosophers, no debates, just discipline, obedience, and an education system that begins at age 7 and involves a lot of spears. Boys are trained to fight, steal, and suffer in silence. Girls are trained to be strong, healthy, and deliver even stronger sons. Sparta is a military machine with a minimalist aesthetic and zero interest in poetry. Despite their cultural genius, the Greek city-states never really figure out how to get along. They form coalitions, they break them. They go to war with Persia, then with each other, then with Persia again. The Peloponnesian War drags on for decades, mostly proving that no one wins when everyone's too stubborn to stop fighting. By the end of it, Athens is broke, Sparta is exhausted, and everyone is looking for someone new to blame. Enter Macedon, specifically Alexander, son of Philip, student of Aristotle, gifted military commander, with unresolved parental issues and an empire-sized ego. At the age of 20, he inherits a powerful army and decides to conquer the known world, not metaphorically, literally. In just over a decade, he defeats Persia, reaches India, and names more cities after himself than any therapist would recommend. He dies young, of course. Fever, poison, ambition, take your pick. His empire shatters within years, but the damage is done. Greek ideas, language, and culture spread like wildfire across 3 continents. Temples, theaters, and libraries appear in places that have never heard of Homer or geometry. Philosophy becomes exportable, logic becomes fashionable, and chaos, Greek chaos, becomes legacy. Ancient Greece doesn't last forever, but its questions do. What is justice? What is truth? What makes a life worth living? And why? For the love of Zeus, can't we stop arguing about it? Rome begins humbly just, a cluster of huts on 7 hills, and a story about 2 wolf-raised twins who couldn't get along. Romulus kills Remus, names the place after himself, and sets the tone for Roman politics, ambitious, violent, and never short on drama. The city grows fast, fueled by trade, war, and the comforting belief that everyone not Roman is either a threat or a future tax base. At first, it's a republic, not the modern kind with polite debates and press conferences, but a brutal, ambitious system run by landowners who really hate the idea of kings but still love being in charge. Power is shared between consuls, who take turns running the show like 2 dads who can't stop arguing. The Senate, mostly rich, wrinkled men with opinions, writes laws, wages, war, and occasionally stabs each other in the back, both figuratively and literally. Despite the political mess, the Romans get things done. They build roads so straight they shame modern infrastructure. Aqueducts bring water into cities with chilling efficiency. Public baths become social hubs. Forums host debates, markets, and impromptu riots. They conquer, absorb, and adapt, borrowing gods from the Greeks, architecture from the Etruscans, and occasionally children from rival tribes. But the Republic can't handle the stress. The more territory Rome swallows, the more unstable it becomes. Generals get powerful. Armies get loyal to people, not institutions. Enter Julius Caesar, a brilliant strategist with an ego the size of the Alps. He marches on Rome, declares himself dictator for life, and sets off every red flag the Senate has. So they kill him on the Senate floor on the Ides of March, no less hopping, to save the Republic. They fail. Civil war follows, and out of the chaos comes Augustus, Caesar's adopted heir. He's clever, subtle. He calls himself first citizen, but rules like an emperor. And with him, the Republic officially dies quietly, with applause, and the Roman Empire is born. The empire is efficient, decadent, and wildly insecure. It stretches from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria. It collects taxes, builds monuments, and throws massive festivals to distract the people from the fact that the emperors are increasingly unhinged. Caligula appoints his horse as a priest. Nero plays music while Rome burns. Commodus fights gladiators for fun and loses public respect in record time. And yet, Rome endures. Its laws shape legal systems for centuries. Its architecture becomes the blueprint for cathedrals, courthouses, and shopping malls. Latin spreads like wildfire and eventually mutates into French, Spanish, Italian, and pretentious tattoos. Roman engineering underpins everything from plumbing to pizza ovens. Entertainment is brutal. Gladiators, usually slaves, prisoners, or desperate volunteers, fight to the death for the crowd's approval. It's blood-soaked theater, with swords instead of scripts. The Colosseum becomes the ultimate venue, hosting naval battles, animal hunts, and public executions, all in the name of keeping the citizens distracted and entertained. By the time the empire finally begins to crack under pressure from invasions, inflation, and emperors who couldn't manage a lemonade stand, Rome has already planted its ideas across Europe and beyond. The city may fall, but its shadow lingers. Because Rome wasn't just a place, it was a performance. And everyone, in some way, is still in the audience. Rome, after centuries of conquering, building, and overachieving in sandals, begins to fall apart not with one big crash, but with a slow, confused unraveling. Borders stretch too wide. Emperors get weird. The economy melts down. Barbarians, who have been knocking politely for centuries, decide to just walk in. Visigoths sack the city in 410 CE. Vandals follow. The Western Roman Empire wheezes its last bureaucratic breath in 476, when the final emperora boy, with the deeply unfortunate name Romulus Augustulus, politely unseated by a Germanic warlord. What comes next is chaos. Cities shrink, trade routes vanish, and suddenly nobody knows how to build an aqueduct anymore. The roads crumble, the baths go cold, Latin splinters into dialects. In the absence of centralized power, Europe fractures into little kingdoms run by warlords who claim divine right and barely know how to read their own names. People who once called themselves Romans now just call themselves tired. Literacy, once maintained by scribes and administrators, becomes the niche hobby of monks. If you're lucky enough to be born near a monastery, you might one day learn to read the Bible. If not, you're likely to go your whole life without encountering the written word. Books are copied by hand on parchment, guarded like holy relics, and written in Latin by people who barely understand Latin. It's not that knowledge disappears entirely, it just goes into hiding. Then come the plagues. The first big one hits in the 6th century, the plague of Justinians, spreading like fire through the Byzantine Empire and leaving piles of bodies and a newfound respect for personal space. It won't be the last. Disease becomes a recurring guest star in Europe's long, slow reboot. In the countryside, life becomes deeply local. You eat what you grow, or you starve. Villages are tiny, isolated, and often built around a lord's manor. In exchange for protection from bandits and the vague hope of not being murdered by the next invader, peasants hand over a chunk of their harvest and accept that their children will also die tilling someone else's field. It's not glamorous, but it's survivable. Meanwhile, the church rises as the one institution that seems to know what it's doing. Monks preserve ancient texts. Bishops settle disputes. The Pope claims spiritual supremacy, and over time, that becomes political supremacy too. Cathedrals begin to rise slowly, laboriously stoned sermons aimed at heaven. Faith becomes the organizing principle of life. Your eternal fate matters more than your taxes, though you still pay both. And yet, despite the gloom, people endure. They sing, they cook, they tell stories by firelight. Not everyone is miserable. Not everything is lost. The term Dark Ages is more of a modern invention than a historical truth, yes. There's collapse, but also reinvention. New kingdoms form. New languages evolve. People adapt, as people always do, even when half the population thinks the end of the world already happened, and they just missed the memo. It's a time of slow rebuilding, of whispered memory, of small victories in muddy fields. It's not Rome anymore. It's not yet the Renaissance. It's something else messy, foggy, and frustratingly human. History hits pause. But the next chapter is already stirring. In the dry heat of 7th century Arabia, a man named Muhammad begins to speak. Not for attention, not for gold, but because he believes he's been chosen to deliver a message, one that echoes with clarity in a region fractured by tribal rivalries, superstition, and brutal cycles of revenge. The message is simple: one God, moral responsibility, and a community built on faith rather than bloodline. The world shifts. Within a few decades, Islam spreads across the Arabian Peninsula like a wildfire wrapped in poetry and law. It doesn't stop there. Through trade, diplomacy, and the occasional very persuasive sword, Islam expands rapidly from Spain to India, from the steppes of Central Asia to the markets of North Africa. But this is not just a religious movement. It's a civilizational engine, one that doesn't just conquer it, collects, translates, and builds. While much of Europe is still squinting at stained parchment and trying not to die of sewage-related diseases, the Islamic world lights up. Baghdad becomes a center of brilliance, not just in architecture but in ideas. The House of Wisdom is founded, and inside its walls, scholars translate Greek, Persian, Indian, and Syriac texts into Arabic, not to copy them, but to challenge them, refine them, and extend them. Algebra is born not as a high school punishment, but as a practical tool for trade, inheritance, and solving real problems. The word itself comes from al-jabr, meaning reunion of broken parts. It's poetic, really math as mending. Medicine advances with precision. Physicians write encyclopedias, perform surgery, and run hospitals that actually resemble hospitals. They understand the pulse, the importance of hygiene, and how to diagnose with observation rather than guesswork or prayer. Astronomy isn't just for looking pretty, it's essential. The Islamic calendar is lunar. Prayer times are tied to the sun. Knowing the movement of celestial bodies becomes both a spiritual and scientific pursuit. Scholars map the stars, name them, and correct Ptolemy with the polite confidence of people who know they're right. Paper, learned from the Chinese, spreads rapidly. Books become common in a way that baffles much of Europe, where even monks might only see one or two in their lifetime. Libraries in Cordoba and Baghdad rival entire kingdoms. Philosophy flourishes. Debate is welcomed. Questions are asked boldly about God, the soul, logic, the nature of time, and connecting it all, the Silk Roads. Not a single route, but a vast web of trade stretching from China to the Mediterranean. Caravans carry silk, spices, glass, furs, gold, paper, and most dangerous ideas. Alongside them travel languages, art, theology, mathematics, and the occasional plague. But mostly, the Silk Roads make the world smaller. A merchant in Cairo knows the weather in Samarkand. A map in Persia includes the rivers of India. Knowledge flows, fast and borderless. Meanwhile, in much of medieval Europe, people are still clinging to saints' bones for protection and treating illness with prayers and leeches. Bathing is suspicious. Education is a privilege. And books are chained to walls, guarded like treasure. In the Islamic world, learning is the treasure. And for a few glorious centuries, this part of the world becomes humanity's memory, drive storing the knowledge of the ancients, writing new software, and handing it off to whoever will listen. The Renaissance is coming, but it will arrive on the shoulders of scholars who prayed toward Mecca and read by candlelight. Welcome to medieval Europe, a land of fog, famine, and flagellation. The Roman Empire is gone. The Renaissance isn't here yet, and everything in between feels like a long, damp layover. Castles rise across the countryside not like the majestic Disney ones, but more like cold stone bunkers built for surviving sieges, storing grain, and reminding peasants who's in charge. Inside, the nobility clomp around in drafty halls, wearing heavy fabrics and suspicious expressions. Outside, the peasants live in wooden huts that leak, smell, and collapse with enthusiasm every few years. Life for most people is short, repetitive, and extremely muddy. If you're born a serf, congratulations, you're part of the land now, literally. You can't leave without permission. Your job is to farm until you die. And the most exciting thing you'll ever see is a traveling peddler or a goose with an attitude problem. Your teeth fall out before your 30s. Your diet consists mostly of porridge and regret. And your social calendar revolves around feast days that remind you how many saints have died horribly for your sins. Religion isn't just a belief system, it's the operating system. The church controls not only salvation, but also education, law, art, and your ability to eat meat on Fridays. Priests deliver fire and brimstone sermons in Latin no one understands. Monasteries hoard books like precious loot, and cathedrals go up slowly, stone by aching stone, often taking centuries to finish. If something good happens, it's a miracle. If something bad happens, it's probably your fault. Or worse, a witch's. Witches, often just women who know about herbs or happen to live alone, are blamed for everything from spoiled crops to hailstorms. Trials are held, accusations fly. People are dunked, burned, or banished based on vibes and livestock behavior. It's not science, but it is very enthusiastic. And then there are the rats. They thrive in the crowded, filthy cities where chamber pots are emptied into the streets, and hygiene is an abstract concept. Fleas ride the rats, plague rides the fleas. And suddenly, a third of Europe is gone. The Black Death doesn't just kill, it unravels. Labor shortages flip the economy, religious panic escalates, and people begin to wonder if maybe the world really is ending. Spoiler, it's not, but it sure feels like it. Despite the doom and grime, people still live. They marry. They sing strange little songs about animals. They brew ale in bathtubs. They wear wool in every season. Troubadours write love poems. Knights joust to impress ladies with 4 teeth and a terrifying bloodline. Occasionally, someone invents something useful, like eyeglasses, the mechanical clock, or windmills. But innovation happens slowly, because everything is filtered through a thick fog of superstition, authority, and poorly translated Aristotle. War is common. Castles are besieged. Banners are raised. Kings get bored and invade neighbors. Crusades are launched, not always successfully, and usually with more drama than divine inspiration. The peasants are taxed to fund it all, because of course they are. The Middle Ages are not completely dark, but they are undeniably damp. The roads are bad, the air is worse, and yet, somehow, people endure. Under all the grime and judgment, a quiet resilience builds. Something's coming. A spark, a shift. But for now, it's just another gray morning, another muddy harvest, and another sermon reminding you to fear the devil and obey your feudal overlord. In the late 8th century, Europe wakes up to the sound of screaming and the smell of burning monasteries. Ships with dragon heads on their prows slide silently up rivers, and out pour the Norsemen tall, loud, and not remotely interested in asking permission. They come from Scandinavia, where the winters are long, the fjords are deep, and the economy mostly consists of chopping wood and arguing with your brother. We call them Vikings, though technically, Viking is something you do, not something you are. It means to go raiding, and raid they do. At first, the rest of Europe thinks they're just barbaric pirates. And yes, they do loot churches, burn villages, and make off with monks and gold. But they're also traders, explorers, and surprisingly chatty once the stabbing stops. Their longships are engineering marvelous light, fast, and able to travel both oceans and shallow rivers, which means nowhere is really safe. One day they're in Norway. The next they're halfway up the Seine demanding silver and possibly lunch. They hit Britain hard. Monasteries get sacked. Kings panic. Villages vanish. The Anglo-Saxon chronicle basically turns into a Viking highlight reel. But the Norse aren't just there to stealth, they start settling. They set up shop in places like Dublin and York, build houses, marry locals, and name everything after themselves. If you live in a place ending in by, Thorpe, or Wick, you've got Vikings in your postal code. They don't stop at England. They go everywhere. East across the Baltic, and deep into what's now Russia, where they mix with Slavic tribes and become the Russias, as in Russia. South to Constantinople, where they end up serving as elite bodyguards for the Byzantine emperors. West to the North Atlantic, where they do something that sounds like a myth but isn't. They find Iceland. Iceland is cold, volcanic, and weirdly perfect for people who enjoy fishing, isolation, and poetic vengeance. The Vikings settle it with typical enthusiasm and immediately start writing everything down. Not on paper, of course in saga. These are epic stories about blood feuds, doomed romances, and arguments that escalate into murder over things like sheep, land, or someone looking at your wife for too long. From Iceland, they push farther Greenland, then even Vinland, which is almost certainly part of North America. That's right. The Vikings discovered the New World around 500 years before Columbus, but they didn't bother to stay, probably because there weren't enough places to sell cod. Culturally, they leave a mark. Their gods are loud, flawed, and obsessed with destiny. Odin sacrifices himself to himself. Thor hits things with a hammer. Loki causes problems on purpose. Their worldview is grim but poetic. Fate is fixed, glory is brief. And the best you can do is die with a weapon in your hand and a good story behind you. As the centuries turn, the Viking raids slow down. Some Norse leaders get baptized to stop the constant excommunication. Others settle into kingships, build towns, and start wearing crowns instead of bear pelts. But the legend remains off longboats in the mist, axes in hand, and a people who refuse to stay put. And somewhere in all of this, they probably invent vodka, or at least drink enough fermented grain to make it seem that way. Long before ships flying European flags stumbled onto African shores with maps, cannons, and fragile egos, the African continent was home to some of the most advanced, complex, and downright impressive civilizations the world had ever seen. These were not the mysterious, dark continents scribbled into colonial journals. They were vibrant, interconnected societies with roads, economies, architecture, and art often centuries ahead of the people who would later pretend they discovered them. In West Africa, the Kingdom of Ghana rose not with steel but with salt and gold, two of the most valuable commodities in the ancient world. While much of Europe was still fumbling through feudalism, Ghana was collecting taxes, organizing trade caravans, and building a reputation as the land of gold. The empire controlled vast swaths of territory and operated a sophisticated bureaucracy. Its rulers sat on thrones made of ivory and held audiences surrounded by gold-draped guards. Far from primitive, Ghana was wealthy, powerful, and organized, and it was just the beginning. Eventually, Ghana gave way to Mali, and Mali wasn't just an upgrade, it was a flex. Under the rule of Mansa Musa in the 14th century, the Mali Empire became one of the richest and most influential powers in the world. Mansa Musa's wealth was so immense that when he went on a pilgrimage to Mecca, he handed out so much gold along the way that he destabilized entire economies for years. Imagine being so rich that your road trip causes regional inflation. That's Mali. Timbuktu, a city in Mali, became a center for scholarship, not warfare. It housed libraries and universities where scholars discussed mathematics, medicine, law, and astronomy. Thousands of manuscripts were written and preserved. Students traveled from across Africa and beyond to learn there. While much of Europe was still burning people for heresy, Timbuktu was debating the finer points of Islamic jurisprudence and translating Greek philosophy. Further east, the kingdom of Aksum in what is now Ethiopia was trading with the Roman Empire while Jesus was still being written about. They minted coins, built monumental obelisks, and adopted Christianity centuries before most of Europe. Their language, Ge'ez, is still studied today, and their churchism carved straight into the rock-hair architectural marvels that boggle the mind and make Gothic cathedrals look like starter homes. Down in southern Africa, Great Zimbabwe rose literally. Massive stone enclosures, intricate walls, and towering monuments built without mortar dominate the landscape. Europeans later refused to believe that Africans could have possibly built such things, attributing the ruins to everyone from Phoenicians to aliens. But archaeology tells the truth. This was a city of kings, merchants, and skilled artisans, built by African hands using African knowledge. All across the continent, trade networks stretched like webs: gold, salt, ivory, spices, and ideas moving from one region to another. Swahili city-states dotted the East African coast, blending African, Arab, and Persian influences into thriving ports of culture and commerce. Inland empires formed, rose, fell, and rose again. These weren't isolated tribes living in timeless stillness. They were nations, empires, kingdoms dynamic and constantly evolving. Africa was never waiting to be discovered. It was busy building, thinking, trading, and thriving. Long before colonizers arrived with flags and manifestos, the continent was already full of stories. The tragedy is not that outsiders found it. The tragedy is that they pretended it hadn't existed until they arrived. Before Columbus got lost and accidentally stumbled into a hemisphere he didn't understand, the Americas were already alive with sprawling cities, mathematical brilliance, intricate agriculture, and calendars that could outsmart your smartphone. These were not untouched wildernesses waiting for salvation. They were cradles of civilization, shaped by ingenuity, ritual, and the kind of engineering that makes you stop and say, wait, how did they do that without metal tools? In Mesoamerica, the Maya were busy charting the stars with terrifying accuracy. They built towering step pyramids that aligned perfectly with celestial events, tracked solar and lunar eclipses centuries in advance, and developed a calendar system so precise it could make your iCal blush. Their writing was one of the most sophisticated scripts in the ancient world, filled with glyphs that recorded dynastic histories, mythology, and notes about rainfall and taxes. Cities like Tikal, Palenque, and Chichen Itza were hubs of religion, politics, and science, complete with massive ball courts where teams played a ritual sport that looked like a mix between soccer and something your high school gym teacher would have invented on a bad day. The stakes were high. Sometimes the losers didn't go home, they were sacrificed. And that wasn't unusual. In these societies, human sacrifice wasn't seen as barbaricide, was a cosmic necessity. The gods gave life, and in return they demanded payment. Blood fed the sun, kept the seasons turning, and ensured that maize would grow again. The rituals were complex, theatrical, and rooted in cosmology, not cruelty. To sacrifice, or be sacrificed, was to participate in the spiritual metabolism of the universe. To the north, the Aztecs would later take this idea and scale it dramatically. Centered in Tenochtitlan Island City, with floating gardens and temples that touched the sky, the Aztecs built an empire through military conquest, tribute systems, and serious architectural swagger. Their capital rivaled anything in Europe at the time, with canals, marketplaces, and clean streets. Yes, clean. They valued hygiene, unlike many of their European contemporaries. They also had a professional class of engineers, artists, and poets. But they were best known for their religion, which involved slicing open human chests on top of pyramids to make sure the sun didn't fall out of the sky. You know, normal apocalypse prevention. Further south, in the Andes, the Inca Empire rose without the benefit of the wheel or writing, as we know it, and still managed to rule over millions. They built a network of roads that stretched over 24 miles, stitched together by rope bridges and relay runners, who could carry messages across mountains in record time. Their cities, like Cusco and Machu Picchu, were carved into cliffs and balanced on slopes like stone puzzles designed by obsessive gods. They used quippus-knotted cordstow record data. Their agriculture was revolutionary, with terrace farming systems that tamed the impossible landscape. And all of this was held together by an empire run on reciprocity, organization, and occasional divine authority. When Europeans finally arrived, they weren't bringing civilization, they were interrupting one. What they encountered wasn't an untouched world, but a complex web of cultures that had already figured out timekeeping, architecture, religion, and empire. The tragedy isn't that these civilizations were primitive, it's that they were seen that way by people who were too busy planting flags to notice the genius in front of them. America before America was brilliant. It just didn't come with Latin or gunpowder. After centuries of plagues, mud, and sermons about the end of days, Europe blinks awake, like someone slowly realizing they left the stove on. The Middle Ages haven't exactly been a brain party, but the embers of old knowledge, Greek philosophy, Roman engineering, bits of medicine and math preserved by Islamic scholars, and lonely monks' air, still smoldering. And now, in places like Florence, Venice, and Milan, those embers catch fire. It's called the Renaissance, which means rebirth, though it's really more of a rediscovery. Europe remembers that thinking is fun, beauty is important, and maybe not everything has to be explained by original sin. Suddenly, art explodes. Not just religious murals of long-suffering saints, but human bodies painted with scandalous accuracy. Muscles, shadows, perspective. Artists become rock stars, literally chiseling their names into history. Michelangelo carves marble until it looks like living flesh, and then tops himself by painting an entire chapel ceiling while lying on his back, presumably cursing in Latin the whole time. Botticelli paints Venus emerging from a seashell, fully nude and fully unapologetic. And Raphael, true to his name, just makes everything look smooth and impossibly balanced, like Instagram filters before they existed. Then there's Leonardo da Vinci, painter, inventor, anatomist, procrastinator. He paints a woman whose smile has confused people for 500 years, and whose name, Mona Lisa, probably the least mysterious thing about her. He sketches helicopters, studies cadavers, writes backwards in his notebooks for reasons no one fully understands, and manages to die with dozens of brilliant ideas unfinished, like a genius with ADHD and a broken printer. While the artists are sculpting abs and flirting with light, the scientists are poking holes in centuries of comfortable ignorance. Galileo Galilei points a telescope at the sky and says, "Hey, maybe the Earth isn't the center of the universe." The church responds with, "How dare you?" and places him under house arrest. Because nothing says divine authority, like being threatened by someone with a better view of the stars. Elsewhere, Copernicus quietly proposes that the planets orbit the sun. Vesalius maps the human body with detail that would have horrified medieval physicians. And Machiavelli writes The Prince, a book that basically says, people are awful, power is messy, and sometimes lying works. It becomes a handbook for politicians, and a reason why no one trusts politicians. The printing press changes everything. Gutenberg's invention turns knowledge into a virus. Suddenly, books aren't rare. Expensive treasures chained to monastery walls. They're everywhere. Ideas spread like wildfire, and so do criticisms of the church, new scientific theories, and really bad poetry. Literacy climbs. Revolutions simmer. The Renaissance is not evenly distributed. It thrives in wealthy Italian city-states, creeps into France and the Low Countries, then eventually crashes into England, where Shakespeare writes, plays so good people still quote them to sound clever. It's not all brilliance. Europe still has plagues, religious intolerance, and enough wigs to fill a warehouse, but something essential has shifted. The mind has become fashionable again. Europe isn't just surviving anymore. It's thinking, questioning, creating. The human spirit, once hunched over in a damp monastery, now stands upright in the light, holding a paintbrush, a compass, and a skull, whispering, "What if?" The age of exploration sounds like a cheerful school, unit maps, ships, adventure, but it's really about greed in a boat. Fueled by a thirst for spices, gold, and glory, European powers set sail into the unknown, with a bold confidence that only comes from not knowing what you're doing. They called it discovery, but what they really meant was claiming things that already belong to someone else, in the name of a country that can't even agree on a flag design. Christopher Columbus is the poster child of this era. He convinces Spain to fund his voyage west to reach the east, because math is optional when you're charming. He sails with 3 ships, a lot of ambition, and no clue. Instead of Asia, he lands in the Caribbean and immediately starts calling everything India, and everyone Indians, a naming mistake so bad it still lingers centuries later. He doesn't find spices, but he does find people who've been there for thousands of years, with their own civilizations, languages, and spiritual systems. Columbus responds by planting a flag, writing in his journal like he's the first person to see palm trees, and kickstarting one of the most violent colonial projects in human history. Meanwhile, Portugal takes the southern route. Explorers like Vasco da Gama sail around Africa to reach India, establishing trading posts, burning ships that disagree with them, and building an empire out of pepper and cannon fire. The Portuguese, efficient and unapologetic, figure out how to navigate oceans and dominate coastlines with terrifying precision. Then comes Ferdinand Magellan, who sails for Spain and becomes the first person to almost circumnavigate the globe. He dies halfway through, stabbed in the Philippines after making a few too many enemies, but his crew finishes the journey, proving definitively that the earth is round and that maritime adventure is mostly about dying in foreign lands for rich men back home. Back in Europe, maps start changing. Sea monsters are replaced with coastlines. Blank spaces get filled in with bold lines and stranger names. Cartographers sketch borders over continents they've never seen. The world, once vast and mysterious, begins to look like something you can own. And that's the problem. This era isn't just about exploration, it's about colonization. European ships arrive with muskets, missionaries, and measles. In the Americas, entire civilizations collapse not because they lacked intelligence or strength, but because they lacked immunity to smallpox and the firepower of empires obsessed with gold. The Aztecs, the Inca, entire nations of indigenous people wiped out or enslaved under the banner of Christian salvation and economic opportunity. Africa and Asia are next. At first, they're just trade targets, but eventually, the explorers return with soldiers, and the traders return with contracts written in languages no one else can read. The slave trade expands. Millions of Africans are kidnapped, chained, and shipped across the Atlantic to labor on plantations in a system so brutal it reshapes continents. The age of exploration gave the world maps, trade routes, and new ingredients for European cuisine, but it also gave the world centuries of conquest, exploitation, and cultural erasure. Discovery was often just theft with better marketing. The oceans got smaller, the world got connected, and everything language, power, identity got rewritten, usually by the people holding the guns. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the age of exploration has morphed into something far more ambitious and cruel. Exploration turns into empire building. Trade turns into domination. And suddenly, a handful of European countries are scrambling to paint the map with their flags like a global game of Monopoly. Except nobody invited half the players, and the rules are written in Latin and gunpowder. Spain, flush with New World gold and a religious fervor that won't quit, plants crosses and crowns from Mexico to the Philippines. Their empire runs on silver, mined by indigenous labor, and enforced through a brutal blend of colonial bureaucracy and missionary zeal. Catholicism spreads, native religions are suppressed, and entire cultures are reshaped or erased under the pressure of European civilization. If the Bible doesn't convince you, the sword usually will. France follows with its own empire, charming in language but equally hungry in appetite. French colonies pop up across West Africa, the Caribbean, Southeast Asia, and Canada. They build fur trading networks, sugar plantations, and military forts all, while pretending to be the more elegant colonizers, as if speaking in poetry makes the oppression more polite. It does not. Then comes Britain, the overachiever of empire. They start small, just a few coastal forts and trading companies, but soon they're running plantations in the Caribbean, tea routes in India, and convicts in Australia. Eventually, they control so much land that the sun literally never sets on the British Empire, though it regularly burns entire cultures to the ground. English becomes the default language of power. British law replaces local tradition. Colonized people are taught to admire the empire that stole their resources and sent their sons to die in foreign wars. Tea, somehow, becomes the liquid symbol of this global mess. Originally from China, refined in India, consumed obsessively in Britain, it turns into a daily ritual funded by conquest. Sugar, also grown by enslaved labor in the Caribbean, sweetens it. Slavery, commerce, and empire are stirred into every cup. It's not just a drink, it's a performance of status, empire, and stolen comfort. Meanwhile, indigenous people everywhere are pushed aside, marginalized, or exterminated. In North America, Native nations are displaced by settlers who arrive with treaties in one hand and muskets in the other. In Africa and Asia, complex societies are reduced to resources, their people labeled subjects instead of citizens. In the Pacific Islands, traditional life is overwritten by missionaries and merchants. Languages vanish, land becomes property, resistance is met with force, and survival often depends on assimilation. Colonial administrators draw borders that make no sense to the people actually living there. Rival groups are lumped together, ancient alliances are ignored, and tension is baked directly into the foundation of modern geopolitics. Generations later, countries will still be dealing with the fallout of decisions made in palaces thousands of miles away by people who couldn't point to them on a map. But for the empires, it's great. They grow rich. They build museums filled with looted artifacts. They hold world's fairs to show off the places they've conquered. And back home, ordinary citizens sip imported tea, wear imported cotton, and rarely think about the human cost of empire, because that part of the story isn't taught in schools. So while flags fly and trade routes flourish, most people live under empire, not for it. For every marble statue and colonial mansion, there are 1,000 forgotten stories of struggle, survival, and quiet defiance. The world becomes interconnected, but at a cost measured in blood, silence, and stolen time. By the late 18th century, people start getting loud, not just in pubs and pamphlets, but in courtrooms, streets, and eventually, battlefields. The world has been stewing under monarchies, empires, and tax collectors for centuries. But now something new is bubbling up. The idea that maybe kings aren't magic, people have rights, and society shouldn't be structured like a rigid game of musical chairs, where only 5 people get chairs and everyone else starves. It starts in the American colonies. 13 British outposts clinging to the eastern edge of North America decide they're tired of being bossed around by a king they've never seen and a parliament they've never voted for. Britain wants taxes. The colonists want representation. Tea is dumped into harbors. Redcoats march. Farmers with muskets and loud opinions organize militias. The Declaration of Independence is written a dramatic breakup letter to King George III, full of Enlightenment ideals, complaints about tyranny, and a suspicious silence on the fact that many of its signers owned slaves. The American Revolution unfolds not as a clean cinematic battle for liberty, but as a messy, violent, drawn-out war full of frostbite, desertion, and awkward alliance, including one with France, who helps America win mostly to annoy Britain. Eventually, the colonists win, the king loses, and the world sees that it's possible to overthrow a monarchy and still have working roads. France is next but, with more wigs and significantly more blood. The French Revolution doesn't start in a forest. It starts in debt. France is broke from helping the Americans, and its tax system makes sure the poor pay everything while the rich and the clergy contribute absolutely nothing except elaborate hats. People are starving, bread prices soar, and Louis XVI is still hosting dinner parties at Versailles. Enlightenment thinkers like Rousseau and Voltaire have been writing books that suggest maybe divine right is nonsense and reason should rule. The people listen. The people get angry. Revolution erupts. At first, it's hopeful. The king is forced to share power. The National Assembly forms. Rights are declared. But then, things spiral. Fast. The monarchy is abolished. The guillotine is built. Heads roll literally. Louis loses his crown and then his neck. Queen Marie Antoinette follows. The Reign of Terror begins. And Robespierre, a man who once spoke of virtue and justice, starts signing execution orders, like he's trying to set a high score. Across the Atlantic, another revolution ignites this one in Haiti, and it's unlike anything the world has ever seen. Enslaved people, led by the brilliant Toussaint Louverture, rise against French colonial rule. They fight not just for reform, but for freedom, dignity, and sovereignty. It's brutal. It's complicated, but it works. Haiti becomes the first independent black republic and the first nation in the world to permanently abolish slavery. European powers are horrified. Slaveholders everywhere start sweating. And all around, monarchs panic. Thrones tremble. Prisons fill. Books are burned. But the Enlightenment's ideas about liberty, equality, reason, and self-rule are out in the open now. They can't be unthought. Revolutions don't fix everything. America still has slavery. France ends up with Napoleon. Haiti is isolated and punished by global powers. But the world has changed. People have seen what's possible. Kings are no longer unquestionable. Rights are no longer privileges. And ideas, once whispered in salons, now march through streets carrying torches. The Industrial Revolution doesn't begin with a bang. It begins with a wheel turning, a piston moving, a machine clanking to life in a damp British workshop. And from that modest beginning, the world transforms at a pace that makes every century before look like it was standing still in muddy boots. In Britain, where coal is cheap and dampness is constant, inventors start tinkering. They build spinning jennies, power looms, and eventually the steam engine machine that doesn't need wind, water, or muscle to keep going. Suddenly, human labor isn't the gold standard of productivity anymore. Machines are faster. Machines don't sleep. Machines don't ask for lunch breaks. This sounds like progress, and in some ways it is, but it also smells like coal smoke and desperation. Factories rise up like mushrooms after rain. Towns swell into cities overnight, built around rivers, railways, and chimneys that belch thick clouds into a sky that will forget what blue looks like for decades. People flood in from the countryside, chasing wages and dreams, only to find themselves packed into slums with rats, sewage, and ceilings that leak moral ambiguity. Child labor becomes a feature, not a bug. Kids work 12-hour shifts in textile mills and coal mines, crawling into places too small or too dangerous for grown men to risk. Fingers are lost. Childhoods are burned out like cheap candles. But the machines keep running, and the profits keep rolling in. Coal is the new king, and it rules with a choking grip. It powers the factories, the trains, the steamships. It heats homes and forges iron. It also coats cities in soot, poisons rivers, and gives generations of workers a cough they never quite recover from. But for all its filth, coal makes everything move. It makes things fast, cheap, scalable. Railroads spread across countries like steel veins. They shrink distances, redefine time, and give rise to the modern clock because now it actually matters if your train leaves at 3:07 instead of when the sun's sort of there. Cities become hubs. London, Manchester, Liverpool, they grow fat on smoke and sweat. Over in America, it's the same story. New York, Pittsburgh, Chicago. Places explode with industry and innovation and the human cost that always trails behind it. The wealth generated is massive. A new middle class emerges: merchants, managers, engineers, people who don't have titles but do have pocket watches. But the gap between rich and poor also grows, until it's not a gap but a canyon. While industrialists build mansions and empires, workers lie stacked like firewood in tenements, buying cheap bread and cheaper gin to get through the week. And yet, out of the haze, new ideas emerge. Workers begin organizing. Unions form. Reformers call for labor laws, public education, sanitation, and better conditions. There's resistance, of course. The rich don't like being told their wealth is built on broken backs. But slowly, society adjusts. Not because it wants to, but because it has to. The Industrial Revolution makes the modern world possible. It creates electricity, mass production, global trade, and eventually, everything from airplanes to smartphones. But it does so at a cost: human, environmental, emotional. Progress, it turns out, smells like smoke, and sometimes it screams. The Victorian era begins with a crown, a wedding, and a stiff upper lip. Queen Victoria takes the throne in 1837, barely 18 and barely ready for the job, and proceeds to rule for over 60 years. It becomes an age so defined by her name that people will later forget she didn't actually invent it. Still, her reign becomes a template for modern royalty. Sentimental, stubborn, endlessly moralizing, and awkwardly obsessed with mourning. Britain, under her rule, becomes the planet's overachiever and micromanager. The empire stretches across continents, swallowing countries and rewriting borders like a student trying to cram a globe into a teacup. The sun never sets on the British Empire, people say proudly, ignoring the fact that it only shines on some parts of it, while others are being looted, colonized, or conscripted. India becomes the crown jewel, which mostly means it's heavily taxed, culturally patronized, and forced to grow things it can't eat. At home, Victorian society is deeply concerned with appearances. Men wear top hats. Women wear corsets, so tight they displace organs. Everything must be proper, orderly, and above all, not openly sexual. Which of course means everything is secretly very sexual. Literature is filled with longing gazes. Table legs are sometimes covered because they resemble real legs, and that is simply too erotic for dinner. People say limb instead of leg, and use fainting couches unironically. Behind the lace curtains and church bells, there's a bubbling stew of repressed desires, hidden diaries, and poorly understood anatomy. Morality becomes performative. Families read the Bible after dinner. Poor people are judged harshly for being poor. Children are to be seen, not heard. And if you catch tuberculosis, you're halfway to being considered romantic. It becomes the disease of poets and pale young women coughing tragically into embroidered handkerchiefs, even as overcrowded slums fester with something far less poetic: cholera, typhoid, and industrial misery. Science, meanwhile, is messing everything up in the best way possible. The Industrial Revolution keeps churning, now with more gadgets and fewer child fatalities. Electricity begins to light up the world. Trains, telegraphs, and early photography shrink space and time. People collect insects, classify fossils, and attend lectures with wild enthusiasm, fueled by a sense that the universe is finally opening up its secrets. Then comes Charles Darwin. In 1859, he publishes On the Origin of Species, and the collective gasp of every Sunday school teacher in England can almost be heard from orbit. Evolution by natural selectio divine spark. No grand design, just a slow, relentless shuffle through time. It's revolutionary, it's terrifying, and it's also scientifically grounded. The church tries to respond with sermons and metaphors. Darwin responds with evidence, diagrams, and a beard that looks like it contains entire ecosystems. The tension between faith and reason becomes one of the defining features of the age. People want to believe in both the God of Genesis and the fossils under their feet. Victorian culture is a study in contradiction, a society obsessed with progress that clings to tradition, a nation ruling the world while terrified of scandal. In the end, the Victorian era leaves behind railways, novels, graveyards, and moral anxiety. It's a time of innovation, oppression, curiosity, and corsets. Everything is blooming and buried at once, especially the butterflies. In the 19th century, the United States stretches its leg sand, then starts kicking itself. The country, still young and uncomfortably stitched together by compromise and contradiction, is expanding fast. Manifest destiny becomes the slogan of the day, a poetic excuse for taking land that already belongs to someone else. Westward expansion is sold as progress, but it's really conquest dressed in stars and stripes. The Louisiana Purchase opens the floodgates. Lewis and Clark explore. Pioneers pack up wagons and chase sunset. The frontier is romanticized as a land of opportunity, even though it's also a land of displacement, back-breaking labor, and deeply awkward outhouses. Indigenous nations, who have lived on the land for generations, are forced out by treaties that aren't honored, armies that don't wait, and settlers who don't ask. The Trail of Tears isn't just a tragedy, it's a policy. Meanwhile, the economy is booming but unevenly. The North industrializes, building factories, railroads, and cities that never sleep. The South clings to cotton, plantations, and the cruel machinery of slavery. Enslaved people build vast fortunes for their owners, their bodies treated as capital, their lives controlled by violence and law. Abolitionists in the North protest with speeches and newspapers. Southern elites respond with threats and theology. And then there's the gunpowder in the powder keg, the question of whether slavery should expand westward with the nation. Every new state becomes a political argument. Missouri? Compromise. Kansas? Bleeding. The country isn't just growing, it's splitting, quietly at first, then loudly. Politicians talk about preserving the Union while pushing it closer to the brink. Then comes the election of 1860. Abraham Lincoln wins on a platform that doesn't call for abolition everywhere, but threatens slavery's expansion. The South sees the writing on the wall, or thinks it does, and starts seceding. One by one, they leave the Union like a friend group imploding over a group chat. By April 1861, war begins. Not a border skirmish, not a regional dispute, a full-blown civil war. It lasts 4 years and kills more Americans than any other conflict in the nation's history. Brother fights brother. Fields turn into graveyards. New technology like railroads, telegraphs, and mass-produced rifles makes the killing more efficient. Battles have names that echo down through time: Gettysburg, Antietam, Appomattox. Slavery is both the cause and the question. Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing enslaved people in Confederate states, turning the war into a moral crusade as well as a constitutional crisis. The Union wins, but at a staggering cost. The South is devastated. Slavery ends, but racism does not. Reconstruction begins, a noble, messy attempt to rebuild the South and integrate formerly enslaved people into public life. It lasts barely a decade before white backlash slams the door shut with segregation laws, lynching, and systemic disenfranchisement. And yet, the country continues to grow. Railroads crisscross the continent, stitched by immigrant labor and fueled by ambition. The frontier closes, cities rise, capitalism blooms. The Wild West becomes mythologized: cowboys, saloons, outlaws. It's all painted over a much bloodier canvas of displacement, exploitation, and lawlessness. America is now more united on paper, but more complicated than ever. The promise of freedom lives beside the reality of inequality. The Constitution is praised while being reinterpreted constantly. The American identity is expanding, but so are the contradictions at its core. Progress and pain ride side by side in the same locomotive, headed toward a future no one quite agrees on. It's not just a country anymore, it's a question. And the arguments have only just begun. It starts with a car ride, a wrong turn, a pistol, and suddenly, the world explodes. In June 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary is assassinated in Sarajevo by a teenage nationalist with a shaky aim and far too much historical impact. It should have been a local tragedy. Instead, it pulls the string on a tangled mess of alliances, empires, and long-simmering tensions. Within weeks, Europe is at war not with reason, but with momentum. It's like a bar fight where everyone's already thrown a punch before realizing what they're actually fighting about. Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Russia mobilizes to defend Serbia. Germany backs Austria. France backs Russia. Germany invades Belgium to reach France, and Britain, feeling protective of Belgium and its own empire, jumps in. Within a month, the world's biggest powers are locked in a global death spiral. Colonies are pulled in. Oceans become battlegrounds. What starts in one city street ends in trench networks stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland. And those trenches, they are not the stuff of noble war stories. They are ditches filled with rats, lice, and mud so deep it swallows boots and sometimes people. Soldiers live in them for weeks, sometimes months. They sleep among corpses, eat cold food, and suffer from trench foot, a condition that rots flesh from standing too long in cold, wet boots. Across from them, maybe 100 yards away, sit the enemy just as miserable. just as young, just as confused about what they're dying for. Technology has evolved. Tactics haven't. Machine guns mow down waves of infantry like grass. Artillery rains steel from miles away. Barbed wire turns open fields into mazes of pain. Mustard gas drifts across battlefields, burning lungs and blinding eyes. Horses still charge into battle, only to be cut down by bullets. Cavalry meets chemical warfare. Chivalry dies gasping in a gas mask. 4 years of this. 4 years of going over the top, which means climbing out of your trench and running into certain death because someone in a command tent thinks this time it might work. Millions die. Millions. Civilians starve. Empires crumble. And entire generations vanish into the mud. And it's not just Europe. Battles rage in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. The United States stays out for a while, then joins in 1917 after a mix of idealism and German submarine attacks. Fresh American troops arrive just in time to tip the scales. Germany, starving and exhausted, finally collapses. The war ends in 1918. Sort of. The guns fall silent. The Treaty of Versailles is signed in 1919. It punishes Germany so harshly that it practically guarantees another war. Borders are redrawn like doodles. The Ottoman Empire is chopped into unstable mandates. Austria-Hungary disappears. Russia, already in the middle of a revolution, becomes something new and frightening: the Soviet Union. They called it the war to end all wars. It wasn't. It was the war that broke the world and taught it nothing. It left behind trauma, broken bodies, empty chairs, and poppy fields that bloom red every November. And somewhere in the silence, after the last shot, the seeds of an even worse war are already beginning to sprout. The 1920s burst onto the world stage like a champagne cork flying across a smoky jazz club. After the unspeakable horrors of World War I, no one wants to think about trenches or treaties anymore. Instead, people want to dance, drink, and forget. The world doesn't heal so much as it distracts itself with saxophones, sequins, and a dangerous amount of optimism. In America, cities swell with music and motion. Jazz takes over nightclubs, syncopated and scandalous, soundtracking an era that feels like rebellion in real time. Young women, now called flappers, ditch corsets for short skirts and bobbed hair. They smoke, drink, vote, and drive, terrifying their grandmothers and thrilling modernity in equal measure. It's the birth of mass culture. Radios, telephones, and silent films shrink the world. Charlie Chaplin makes people laugh without saying a word. Louis Armstrong redefines what a trumpet can do. And everywhere, there's a sense that anything is possible if you just stay up late enough. Meanwhile, prohibition makes drinking illegal and instantly more popular. The U.S. government bans alcohol in 1920, creating a golden age of bootlegging, speakeasies, and organized crime. Gangsters like Al Capone rise to power, supplying liquor to a nation that suddenly realizes it drinks more when it's not allowed to. Its crime is performance, art-sharp suits, Tommy guns, jazz bands in the back room. But beneath the glitter, the foundation is wobbling. The economy seems unstoppable. Stock markets soar. People who've never invested a dime are suddenly borrowing money to buy shares. Buy now, pay later becomes not just a slogan but a national strategy. Banks lend freely. Wages stagnate while profits balloon. It's capitalism in overdrive, powered by blind faith and bad math. And then, one October day in 1929, the music stops. The stock market crashes not all at once, but fast enough to spark panic. People rush to sell. Prices plummet. Fortunes vanish in hours. Banks, over-leveraged and under-regulated, start to collapse. People who thought they were rich wake up broke. People who thought they were safe wake up jobless. It's not just a bad week. It's the start of the Great Depression. Factories close. Farms fail. Breadlines grow longer than the job listings. In cities, entire families sleep in shanty towns made of scrap metal and hope. In the countryside, Dust storms swallow the Great Plains, turning rich farmland into a choking wasteland. Children cough through masks of cloth and pray for rain. The American dream starts to feel like a cruel joke told by a banker. Worldwide, the depression spreads like economic poison. Germany, still reeling from war reparations, descends into chaos. Britain limps through austerity. Japan militarizes. The global economy, once giddy on speculation and invention, now drowns in its own excess. Back in America, President Herbert Hoover insists recovery is just around the corner, but it isn't. Not yet. And as the 1930s begin, the world realizes the party's not just over it, may have been an illusion all along. The jazz fades, the lights dim, and history exhales, bracing for the next punch. World War II doesn't sneak up on anyone. It builds brick by hateful brick, until the world has no choice but to notice. In the aftermath of the First World War, the Treaty of Versailles was meant to secure peace, but mostly, it just left Germany humiliated, broke, and quietly boiling with resentment. Enter Adolf Hitler, a failed artist with a gift for speeches and a hatred for everyone he blamed for Germany's fall. His message is simple, terrifying, and effective. Germany must rise again. The Nazis promise order, pride, revenge. They also promise racial purity, which translates into systematic violence that escalates quickly from intimidation to extermination. In 1939, Hitler invades Poland. Britain and France declare war. The world braces for impact. It's not just a European problem this time. The war stretches across continents like a tightening net. Germany blitzkriegs through France in 6 weeks. Britain hangs on by stubbornness, radar, and Winston Churchill's growl of a voice. The Soviet Union flips sides, then flips again when Hitler invades them in 1941. The Eastern Front becomes a hellscape of frozen bodies, scorched villages, and unimaginable loss. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, Japan, already deep into its imperial ambitions, bombs Pearl Harbor, dragging the United States into the war. Now it's truly global. From the deserts of North Africa to the islands of the Pacific, humanity is fighting everywhere, all at once. Battles have no fixed front, no clear winner, no breaks. Civilians die in cities bombed from the sky. Soldiers die in jungles, beaches, and frozen forests. Everyone loses something. The Holocaust unfolds not in secret, but in stages escalating, from exclusion to ghettos to deportation to industrialized death. 6 million Jews are murdered, alongside millions of Romani, disabled people, political prisoners, LGBTQ+ individuals, and countless others deemed undesirable. It is genocide as policy. Horror made into routine. Gas chambers hum. Trains arrive on schedule. Bureaucracy becomes an accomplice to atrocity. The world will pretend it didn't know, but it did. It just didn't want to believe. Technology, once celebrated for progress, now finds its darkest purpose. Planes drop bombs on entire cities. Submarines stalk oceans. Codes are broken. Rockets are tested. And in 1945, the war ends not with a surrender but with an explosion. The United States drops atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, instantly vaporizing tens of thousands of lives and introducing a new age, one where humanity can destroy itself with the press of a button. Germany surrenders in May. Japan follows in August. The Allies win, but calling it a victory feels hollow. Cities lie in ruins. Families are gone. Soldiers return home broken in body and spirit. The world looks in the mirror and sees what it's capable of. No one is untouched. No one forgets. The war leaves behind a united nations, a divided Germany, a Cold War in the making, and a radioactive aftertaste. The trauma echoes through generations in silence, in stories, in the way the world builds its borders and fears. World War II doesn't just change history, it scars it, and the scars never fade entirely. The Cold War is less of a war and more of a staring contest with missiles behind each eyelid. After World War II ends in rubble and radioactive dust, The planet splits not geographically, but ideologically. On one side stands the United States, draped in capitalism, Coca-Cola, and a firm belief that everything is better with more democracy and television. On the other side is the Soviet Union, wrapped in communism, concrete, and the unshakable idea that it knows what's best for the working class even if it has to send a few million of them to gulags first. The world doesn't explode, but it simmers. There are no direct battles between the two superpowers, because mutual assured destruction, the charming theory that if one side fires a nuke, everyone dies, keeps fingers nervously off the big red button. Instead, they fight everywhere else. Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Latin America, Africa. These become the chessboards of global politics, where revolutions and regimes are propped up or knocked down based on who's willing to supply weapons, money, or just a stern ideological pamphlet. Back home, paranoia becomes patriotic. In the United States, people see communists in their cornflakes. Joseph McCarthy waves blank papers in ruins, lives in the name of anti-red purity. Hollywood gets blacklisted. School children learn to duck and cover under their desks in the event of nuclear war, as if a laminated multiplication table will deflect atomic fire. Fallout shelters are stocked with canned beans and existential dread. Meanwhile, the Soviets build walls literally. The Berlin Wall splits Germany in half like a psychological scar, separating the bright lights of the West from the gray hush of the East. Escape attempts are made with hot air balloons, tunnels, and desperation. Some succeed, many don't. Both sides race to outscience each other. The space race becomes the least violent and most awe-inspiring competition of the era. The Soviets strike first with Sputnik, a tiny satellite that beeps ominously over Earth and triggers American nightmares. Then they send a dog, then a man. The United States responds with sheer budgetary panic, pouring billions into NASA. And then, in 1969, Neil Armstrong steps onto the moon and delivers one small step for man and one giant patriotic mic drop. Culturally, the Cold War is everywhere. In spy novels, in blockbuster films, in radio signals that may or may not be coded messages. James Bond battles villains in tuxedos, while real-life operatives trade secrets in alleyways and bug embassies with the enthusiasm of paranoid ants. Technology advances in the name of defense, but ends up producing microwave ovens, GPS, and computers that eventually get used to argue online about pineapple on pizza. The tension peaks in moments like the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the world holds its breath for 13 days, wondering if this is the moment everything turns to ash. It doesn't, barely. The crisis ends, but the fear lingers. The arms race never really stops. By the 1980s, the stockpiles of nuclear weapons are large enough to destroy Earth several times over, just in case the first attempt misses. And then, just when it seems endless, it ends quietly. The Berlin Wall falls in 1989, not with gunfire but with hammers and hope. The Soviet Union collapses under its own contradictions, bureaucracy, and bankrupt economy. The Cold War dissolves not in fire, but in paperwork and grainy television footage of people dancing on concrete ruins. The world breathes, sort of. The weapons remain. The ideologies linger. The fear is harder to kill than the enemy ever was. And somewhere, deep in an abandoned missile silo, the silence is louder than ever. It begins innocently enough with clunky dial-up tones and blinking modems, a weird frontier of chat rooms and pixelated websites. The internet in the late 20th century is a novelty, a strange digital wilderness, where people build personal web pages covered in glittery GIFs and argue about Star Trek in forums that load slower than a snail on sedatives. But soon, it starts growing, faster than anyone expects, faster than most people can comprehend. And then, it eats everything. In the 2000s, phones get smarter. At first, it's just emails and awkward T9 texting. Then the touchscreen arrives, and suddenly, we're all walking around with tiny supercomputers in our pockets, capable of streaming movies, tracking steps, ordering pizza, and destroying our attention spans in record time. Social media platforms emerge like digital cities, MySpace, then Facebook, then Twitter, then everything else. People who once wrote diary entries under lock and key now broadcast their breakfast to strangers for likes. Privacy quietly packs its bags and leaves. Cameras are everywhere. Cookies track you across websites like polite stalkers. Your data becomes currency bought, sold, mined. You're the product, but you're also the addict. Algorithms learn what makes you click, then feed you more of it until you're too tired to remember what you were originally looking for. The internet doesn't just know you, it shapes you. Your fears, your purchases, your politics. It learns what makes you mad and keeps you there. Globalization, already moving fast, now hits warp speed. A factory in Vietnam makes your shoes. A warehouse in Ohio ships them. An influencer in Berlin reviews them. You watch it all from a couch in Nairobi. Cultures blend, languages mix, and borders blur not physically, but virtually. It's a new world, stitched together by fiber optics and satellite signals. Ideas spread instantly. So do lies. So do cat videos. Memes become the new hieroglyphics, funny, disposable, deeply coded. They're jokes, but also commentary. They capture moods faster than essays ever could. A single image can say, "The world is ending and I'm exhausted," and everyone immediately understands. Humor becomes the coping mechanism for a world too connected to ever fully rest. But the connection comes at a cost. Mental health quietly erodes in the background, like a battery nobody realizes is draining until the phone shuts off. The constant stream of information overwhelms the brain's old wiring. Doom scrolling becomes a habit. Comparison becomes culture. You're never alone but rarely at peace. Notifications buzz like anxious gnats. Everyone's performing, even when they're pretending not to. And somewhere between the tweets and filters, authenticity becomes a puzzle no one's sure how to solve anymore. Children grow up never knowing a world without screens. Relationships form in DMs. Arguments explode in comment sections. Movements start with hashtags. Cancellations happen in real time. The line between real and virtual dissolves until your online self feels more real than the one brushing its teeth at 2 a.m. The internet doesn't just change the world, it rewires it. How we love, how we learn, how we believe. It connects billions, divides millions, and never logs off. And through it all, we keep scrolling, half in awe, half in panic, wondering what comes next and whether we'll be able to unplug when it does. The 21st century begins with a loud alarm that no one wants to hear. The planet is heating up, not slowly, not subtly, but unmistakably. Ice melts, storms intensify, wildfires leap across continents. Entire species vanish while humans argue about gas prices. The climate doesn't whisper anymore, it screams. This wasn't a surprise. Scientists had been warning about it since the late 20th century, waving data like flares in a dark room. CO2's levels are rising, they said. The Earth is warming. Glaciers are retreating. Weather is becoming erratic. At first, the warnings are dismissed as overreactions. Then they're acknowledged. Then they're politicized. And finally, they're ignored again, because changing course would mean inconveniencing growth, profit, comfort. The Industrial Revolution planted the seeds. A few centuries of burning coal, oil, and gas have reshaped the atmosphere. Now carbon hangs in the sky like an invisible heat lamp, turning the entire planet into a slow cooker. The Arctic, once permanent and frozen, becomes seasonal. Sea levels creep upward. Coastal cities watch the tide not with wonder, but with spreadsheets and evacuation drills. Forests burn longer, hotter, and faster. What used to be fire seasons become fire years. Australia, California, the Amazon entire regions choke on ash. Trees, once the Earth's lungs, become smoke. Species that survived meteors and ice ages now can't survive human development. Coral reefs bleach white. Monarch butterflies disappear. Polar bears drift on shrinking floes, icons of a crisis that can no longer be photoshopped into optimism. And still, emissions rise. Some countries try. Agreements are signed, climate summits held, pledges made with great fanfare and little follow-through. Net zero by 2050 becomes a popular phrase, mostly because it sounds responsible while staying safely out of reach. Fossil fuel companies launch ad campaigns about being green while continuing to dig. Carbon offsets become the environmental version of confession. Sin freely, pay later. Meanwhile, billionaires look up. Space becomes the new frontier not for science or exploration, but for luxury. As Earth warms, a handful of ultra-rich individuals build rockets and sell tickets to the stratosphere, framing it as innovation, while Earth's poorest struggle to afford clean water. The fantasy of escaping the planet becomes a tech-fueled fever dream, a distraction from the hard truth. There is no backup Earth, no second atmosphere, just this one, overheating. Young people take to the streets. Movements rise, school strikes, protests, lawsuits. Greta Thunberg stares down world leaders with more conviction than entire parliaments. There's urgency in their voices, science in their slogans. But power moves slowly, especially when it's making money off staying still. The climate isn't waiting. Permafrost thaws, releasing methane. Floods swallow neighborhoods. Droughts turn farmland into dust. Climate refugees say, hypothetical become reality. Not in decades, but now, entire regions are becoming uninhabitable, and the poorest, who contributed the least to the problem, suffer first and worst. Earth doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about polling numbers or campaign donors. It reacts, blindly, to chemistry and physics, and it's reacting fast. We're past the point of prevention. Now it's about mitigation, adaptation, survival. And yet, even as the atmosphere breaks records and glaciers collapse into rising seas, hope flickers. Renewable energy grows. Youth movements gain momentum. Some leaders finally listen. The question is no longer whether change is coming, it's whether it will be enough, and whether it will come in time. The climate screams. The world listens, but listening isn't enough anymore. After 13 billion years of chaos, combustion, and compromise, here you are. Not in a spaceship or a throne room or an ancient cave butt in bed. Maybe in your favorite hoodie, scrolling through glowing pixels on a little glass rectangle. You are the result of everything that came before stardust. Microbes, plagues, wars, poetry, power outages, awkward first dates, and forgotten gods. The universe has been hurtling toward this moment, this night, this version of you lying there blinking at a screen while your brain tiptoes toward sleep. You are a miracle, but not the shiny kind. You're the messy kind, the survived every extinction kind, the product of creatures that crawled from oceans and coughed their way into lungs, of ancestors who ran from predators and taxes, of apes who discovered fire and promptly burned dinner with it. You're made from particles forged in dying stars, yet somehow you're also deeply invested in whether or not someone liked your post. You're a consciousness stuffed into a body that still flinches at loud noises and remembers embarrassing things from middle school at 3 a.m. You carry the instincts of cavemen and the cravings of algorithms. You're wired for storytelling, which is why you're here, chasing meaning in the grand chaos of it all, looking for patterns in a history that was never linear, just loud. Right now, the world is spinning at 10 miles per hour under your bed. The moon is pulling at the oceans. The sun is 93 million miles away, and yet it controls the food you eat and the mood you're in. Somewhere, forests are breathing. Somewhere else, someone is inventing something that will change everything again. And somewhere, someone is laughing so hard they forget the world is on fire for a second. You are not alone. 7 billion other people are doing the same thing in their own heads, overthinking, forgetting passwords, wondering if they've done enough, if they are enough. But you're here. You made it through another day. In the long timeline of the universe, your existence is a blink, but it's your blink, and that matters more than most things. You carry history in your bones, your blood, your habits, every laugh, every heartbreak, every time you reached for someone or something, it all stacks quietly into the mountain of now. You are the living proof that life didn't give up, that somehow, against odds both cosmic and personal, something kept going until it became you. There's no grand moral, no tidy ending, just the soft thrum of being alive in this moment. And that's enough. You are not a footnote. You're the punctuation mark at the end of a chapter the stars didn't even know they were writing. So close your eyes, or let them drift. Breathe like the planet hasn't stopped spinning since the first bacteria argued about division of labor. Sleep like the world can wait. You've made it this far. You're part of the story now. And tomorrow, you keep writing it.